This woman is right up my alley and yours too. Her name is Jennifer Fernjack here on Author's Corner. Her book is Greater Than: The Power and Strength of Emotional Grit. I mean, that just nails it, the title. I think we all need this for sure. So we're thrilled to have her with us on America Tonight with me, Kate Delaney. Jennifer, thanks for hanging with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Kate. I appreciate it.
What was the road for you to writing this book? What was the motivation?
So in 2016, I got the surprising diagnosis of a brain tumor. And the reason why I say surprising is because I never even had a headache. It was literally my eye doctor who acted on a hunch. And then I went to a specialist who also acted on a hunch. And that's when the tumor was discovered. And the things that I learned that actually took the edge off my experience in terms of like making me feel better sometimes from a psychological perspective or even a physical perspective by lowering stress, I wanted to pass along to others so that they could be helped in their circumstance as well.
And it's interesting because you talk about it right in the beginning. I mean, you get that curveball and then you see what you take with that luckily, and you said it right away to all of us, that you got the surprising diagnosis, but thank goodness for the eye doctor. Thank goodness for the people who were paying attention to the signs, because who knows what would have happened otherwise. And that's a great way to look at that, to turn that around. And throughout this book, that's really, really what you do. And you talk about fear and embracing it and how do you reduce it. So tell us more about the book. And that's one of the things you talk about. How do you reduce or eliminate fear?
Sure. So I think that different people view the word fear differently. The way that I choose to view it as being afraid doesn't mean the absence of fear necessarily. It could actually be feeling afraid and being able to persevere anyway. And I think perspective is a good part of that. So it's being able to flip the script. So certain things in life, the whole proverbial idea of the glass being half full or half empty, goes a long way. But along with a good mindset like that, as far as being able to persevere, comes just things that, as I alluded to, that can actually help take the edge off your experience. So there's a reason, for example, why VA hospitals have dogs for people with PTSD. Dogs can actually lower cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, and influence the feel-good chemical called dopamine in your brain. The same thing can be said for music. Now, of course, music is a very subjective concept. I mean, one person's good music is somebody else's noise. But music can also make a difference in people physically. I know in my book and in my corresponding podcast, I also wrote about how people with Parkinson's disease who tend to shake won't shake as much, if at all, when dancing to music that has meaning for them. So, for example, if they hear music, like maybe it's like big band era music or Frank Sinatra kind of stuff that reminds them of their first kiss or maybe their first car or just positive old memories, can increase those feel-good chemicals of the brain. And that's why a lot of times now healthcare facilities will provide that kind of music for people. So, whether it's music or pets, even kindness, I try to show people through the book that with kindness, of course, the recipient could feel good for the kind gesture, but the person who initiates the act can feel good as well. You can get what's called a helper's high or a serotonin rush. So the stories that I have in the book, along with the corresponding science that's underneath them, just show that the best things in life are free. It's just a matter of being aware of them and knowing that they could apply to your circumstance, whether it's a health scare like mine, or perhaps job stress or relationship issues. It can help anybody.
Yeah, that's all good stuff. And you want the good stuff. So you can get this book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever great books are sold. How do people get your podcast?
So my podcast is on YouTube on my podcast channel, which is Emotional Grit. And it's also on my website, which is jenniferfernjack.com. So I have some phenomenal guests on there. One person spoke to how he speaks and works at an actual school for the blind, where there are people who are visually impaired who play hockey. I also, on the podcast, spoke with someone who helps teach blind people how to ski veil. In addition,
Wow.
I interviewed a Minneapolis firefighter who helped his friend who was attacked by two bears when four of the friends, including the firefighter, were hiking out west. And the helicopter that came to save the physician after he was attacked only had room for one, which meant the firefighter had to stay behind by himself in bear territory, overnight. So I interviewed people about their stories, and in situations where when you can't not experience something, it's how do you figure out the how? I mean, how do you get through it? And of course, with the examples of the sports, people are just choosing to face their fears and overcome them rather than be consumed by them.
Yeah, great stories, all of them, and that's what this book is filled with, which I think is so key because you're not just talking about it. Here's things you can do. You're also paying it off by, look, here's an example of what happened. Somebody famous, somebody interesting, and you weave that throughout the conversation. I like right in the very beginning, one of the beginning chapters, Hidden Treasures, where you talk about your life, where you talk about your influences and some of those individual moments. I think it's easy to forget moments, right? Because we're just staring down the barrel of what's happening right now.
Definitely. I would say that the things that have kind of had an influence on me throughout my life are not just things that have happened to me, but also things that I've observed in others. So I know that there's one story that I share as part of my public speaking about my mom. She's done mission work down in Mexico for probably, I'd say, over 30 years. And oftentimes those trips were to the same orphanage for years at a time as she watched these children grow. Well, on one of her trips, she noticed that a lot of the kids had shoes that were worn through, so she wanted to buy shoes for them. But then she realized that a lot of times the kids were wearing shoes they had inherited from older kids, or perhaps they were wearing shoes that somebody had donated. So she thought, well, I can't just ask them, what's your shoe size? Even though she had the donations from people who were supporting her trip to pay for the shoes, it's, well, what do you do as far as buying them? Well, not one to be defeated. She asked someone for pieces of paper and a pen. And it was then that she got down on her hands and knees and she traced the kids' feet. She then went back across the border into Texas, brought the pieces of paper to a Walmart and said, I need shoes in these sizes, please. So she learned to just figure out the how. Even though it wasn't
Wow.
ideal, she figured out the how. I also think about how when I was in high school, it was actually my senior year of high school, and I put this in the book as well. I met a grad party for a friend of mine, and her dad approached me, knowing that I came from a single parent household where money was tight. And he said, well, Jennifer, where are you going to go to school in the fall? And I mentioned I was going to be going to a neighboring state school. And he said, well, you don't want to do that. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, at a state school, all the classrooms will probably be huge lecture halls. It'll be hard to hear. And I looked at him without missing a beat. And I said, well, then I'll sit toward the front. And so, and so I think that in my mind, it's not that life isn't going to have its challenges. It's a matter of us as individuals, including me, can have a voice in our experience. And so whether it was things that I experienced growing up or things that I learned from other people, they help hone my mindset later in life when I got the brain tumor diagnosis. Pretty amazing stuff.
It is pretty amazing. And tell us what's happened with you health-wise since that diagnosis.
So I'm very grateful to say that it used to be that I would have an annual MRI just to see if there's any kind of regrowth in the remaining cells. And I'm on a 2-year cycle of MRIs. So far, no regrowth. I say that in that just for background for listeners, my surgeon thankfully had the wisdom to remove only half the tumor. The other half of the tumor that remains is partially encasing the carotid artery, so it was too dangerous to take out. So even though those cells aren't cancerous, they got radiation. And so the thought is the radiation would kill the cells, but just to make sure that everything is fine, that's why I continue to have the MRIs. And so, yeah, so it's my life feels like I'm back to normal. I know that obviously I have the MRIs, at least for the next 2 years, but it's something where I'm grateful with all the positive things that have come with this whole experience. One of the most meaningful conversations I've had with someone about the book was at a neuro-oncology conference in Hamburg, Germany, a couple of years ago. So I'm sharing the book to neurosurgeons and neuroscientists and neurologists and nurse practitioners, all kinds of people from around the world. It was a fascinating conference to attend. But at one point, I was standing by a booth with my book, and I wanted to give it to people to share at their hospitals. Well, this one gentleman comes out of the crowd and approaches me kind of abruptly, and he said, "My people said I should talk to you about my book, or about your book." And I said, "Oh, great." And he said, "Well, why should I care about your book?" And I said, "Well, what do you do at your hospital?" And he said, "Well, I'm a neurosurgeon at a children's hospital in Denmark." And I said, "Okay, so at your hospital in Denmark, do they allow patients to pick out their favorite kind of music before getting into an MRI machine or a CAT scan or something where it's kind of an ominous machine and people are scared?" And he said, "Well, oh yeah, of course." And I went, "Okay." I said, "Well, I think that's great, but I believe from my personal experience and the research I've done that asking someone who's your favorite band or what are your favorite songs can carry more weight." And he looked at me kind of like, wasn't that semantics? So I said, okay, well, let's have a hypothetical. Let's pretend that you're the patient, not the surgeon. And he said, okay. I said, so if someone asked you what's your favorite kind of music, what would you say? And he said, well, I would say classical, of course. And I went, all right. So I said, who's your favorite composer? And he said, well, Tchaikovsky. And I went, okay, who's your least favorite composer? And he rolls his eyes and he goes, ugh, Mozart. And I said, okay, so let's go back to the hospital now. And if you ask a patient, or in this case, it's you, I guess, what's your favorite kind of music? And you say classical. What if they play Mozart the whole time? You're going to hate it. It's not going to have the intended effect that they wanted for you. And he grabs my book out of my hands that I wanted to give him anyway, looks me right in the eye, and he said, you have no idea what you just did for my patients. And he walked away and disappeared in the crowd.
Ah, perfect place to end this. Now I'm running through my playlist in my head. Should I need it? I'm like, oh, I've got a dentist appointment. And I think all of the people listening can relate to that. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And your book is wonderful. Pick it up. Like I said, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Greater Than the Power and Strength of Emotional Grit. Jennifer Fernjack, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Kate.
So interesting as a keynote speaker, she really spreads that conversation around, the 6 strategies too. She talks about that helped her get through her brain tumor diagnosis and the stuff that she still uses today to change her brain chemistry. She hear for the better. And that podcast really nails it, how she shares her own story of how emotional grit helped her conquer her biggest challenge of her life and was able to thrive as well. So we wish her continued success. What a great person. Stay with us.
Visit us at www.greatwritersmedia.com. Email us at info@greatwritersmedia.com or call us at +1 877 556 0486.